Down the Street Live, where we meet interesting people throughout America and beyond. I've always been attracted to interesting people. You know, those unique individuals who take a different path and follow their heart. Well, today I'm going to be catching up with Tom Conwell, whose motorcycle accident taught him about the stock market and led to a successful career as a trader, investor, media personality, and his mission to help others attain financial security. So come along with me as I go down the street live. Down the Street Live, produced by KN Lifestyle TV Productions, exclusively for Step North Digital TV, television like never before. We're about to go in and meet Tom Conwell. He's a financial expert, and I'm going to guarantee you that you're going to learn things about finance that you never knew before. So come on with me, let's go meet Tom. Hey Tom, how are you?
Hi Rob, thanks for coming.
Tom, first of all, thank you for spending some time with me. I think you're
My pleasure.
an incredibly interesting guy.
I started out as an accounting major up at the University of Minnesota, and my mother, who passed away my freshman year, thought that I should do something steady to be able to get a steady job and become, just an accountant.
The audience is going to learn a lot about finance, and it's going to learn a lot about the early years of trading, if you will.
I played hockey for the university, and we had summers off, and so I purchased a motorcycle. And I was driving my motorcycle on Highway 10 going up to Duluth, Minnesota, which is somewhere near Frostbite Falls, I think, if you're a Bullwinkle Moose fan. Highway 10 was a little highway. It was a beautiful day, and I was just driving along, and unfortunately some person in a pickup truck was driving out of a VFW, and he started to be on the side of the road, and I looked at him. I was going 60, 65 miles an hour, and then he decided to pull out when I got about 50 feet from him. So I turned my motorcycle sideways, and it was the meanest hip check I ever laid in my life, because I didn't want to launch and go forward over the pickup truck. So I ended up totaling the pickup truck, spent 3 months in traction in Mayo Clinic, and they never thought I was going to walk again. Sued the gentleman and got $50,000, which back in 1978 was a pretty fair sum of money.
Yeah.
But I was still pretty young. I was only 18 years old, and so my father kind of took control of it so I wouldn't go out and just blow it all away. My dad was home from one of his merchant marine trips, and took a trip to Washington. And he met a mailman that he became friends with, and the mailman said that there's this beautiful young woman down the street. The mailman hooked my mother up and my dad on a blind date at they met underneath the Eagle at Bookbinder's Restaurant in Philadelphia. I don't know if it's still there. I think it is. My mom was quite a bit younger than my father, and they got married in January, and I was born the following January. So it was a pretty quick romance. My mother was a singer. She was singing in different groups. Her main stay was she sang for the Metropolitan Opera. She was an opera soprano. She then parlayed that into a little television show on WFYI when they did live television and they needed to fill up the space. So she had a piano and she would sing songs on Saturday afternoons. Quick anecdote was I remember the very first time, I was probably 3 or 4 years old, saw my mother on television, and I thought, how the heck could they make her so small to fit in that little box? And my dad just chuckled, and he never let me forget that. But they had a very good romance, very much in love. I was the only child. My dad said he put all he had into me, and that was the best he could do. Most people didn't have a father like mine that was very astute in financial things and had personal hands-on experience with my motorcycle proceeds. He decided to invest in a little company called AT&T. And so after about a year of being at AT&T, the AT&T split into all the Baby Bells. And so my $50,000 got split 8 ways. And within about 2 years, I had almost $500,000.
Wow.
And I changed my major from accounting to finance. And I said, there's something about the stock market thing that's pretty good. I don't advocate getting in an accident to get money. It's never worth it, let me tell you that. But I feel very fortunate that I had this experience and these resources at my fingertips. I always loved my father because he never put his choices upon me, or never he mentored me, and he enabled me to do whatever I chose to do, but he never told me that you should go into the Navy or you should play basketball because I played basketball. I did my own things and he supported it. Living in the Chicago area, there was a lot of finance. Finance was lived and breathed in the downtown Chicago area. I was a young man, just graduated with a finance degree, and I had to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And since I had this new epiphany about finance, I did what a lot of young men did, and women, not too many women in this day. I bought a seat on the Chicago Board of Trade. I got what they call an A&M seat so I could trade bonds. And I learned how to trade United States Treasury bonds, $100,000 Treasury bonds. And back in those days, the early 80s, it was before handheld computers. We didn't have phones. We didn't have any of the things that we communicate with now. So it was rough and tumble. We used to call it Monopoly football because they actually had a pit with steps on it, and the higher up in the pit you were, the more credibility you had, and you were usually a bigger, better trader. And so there were 2 types of traders. There were traders that executed for companies like Merrill Lynch or First Boston or those, and then they were what they called locals, and the locals would just trade for themselves. And so we would buy and sell and bump and kick and punch, and guys would get thrown out of the exchange floor, and they'd spit on you, and God forbid somebody had a chili dog the day before. It was always a problem because everybody was right next to each other. A lot of times it was very exciting, and you could actually make $5 a trade if you were executing for a company, and you do maybe 10,000 trades in a day or 20,000 trades in a day. So you can do the math on that. Or if you were a local, some days guys could make up to $50,000 themselves, and boy, that was a real recipe for interesting times, especially back then. $50,000, 23 years old, and no place to put it. There was a lot of stories that came about. So I felt a need to try to help, because I saw so many so-called stockbrokers and bankers and advisors who really didn't teach people much. When I decided to buy a seat, you have to take a test, and you have to be sponsored, and you have to get people to acknowledge that you're on the trade, and you have to then get what they call a clearing firm and all this other good stuff. But back in those days, it was really fun because it was a group of people that had a good time, worked really hard because there wasn't the computerization that we have today. When I called it Monopoly Football, it's because I'm trying to get the attention of the person who's either I want to buy from, which you would hold your hands in and say, I want to buy, and you tell them the numbers, because we had a set of signals that would say how much you're willing to pay and how many shares you would want or how many contracts you would want. The other way around, I'd have to yell maybe across the floor 20, 30 feet to somebody who I want to sell to, because they're willing to buy these contracts at a certain price. It was very competitive, extremely competitive, because there's only so many contracts or shares to be bought or sold at any certain time. And if a guy was standing right next to me and he wanted to buy those shares, I'd have to try to elbow him out. And there was more than one time where people would get thrown off the pit, and that's about a 10-foot drop down to the bottom of the floor. And you couldn't leave. It's created some of my bad eating habits that I have, because we had to be on the floor from the bell open to the bell close. Every once in a while you could run away if it got quiet, but you couldn't eat on the floor. So you had to stay in the pit for however many hours that the contracts were open, and different contracts, would be open for different things. The currencies would be open, from 8:30 in the morning to 1 Central Time, or 1:30. And then you had the bonds that were open, the S&Ps that were open until when the stock market closed. So it was a very dynamic, very exciting, and also very adrenaline driven. It was very suited for sports players, because you could elbow and hit and stomp on a guy's foot, and maybe push him out of the way a little bit, just enough to distract him so you could get the sale of the guy next to you. And you had certain buddies that you worked with more than others, and certain people that you didn't like. And then you also had the trust fund babies that would come in there with daddy's, $1 million. And by the end of the month, he was lucky if he had 10 cents in his pocket anymore, because everybody would take his trades away. So now everybody's seen the movies. One of my favorite is Trading Places, where the clips of the news where you're seeing the floor traders. It's nothing like it was in the 80s and the 90s. Now there are no really open outcry trades going on. Everything's done through the computers, everything's done through the back channels. But because it was so loud, it was like a gymnasium, we had our own set of language. We had hand signals for everything. So if you were buying, you had to have your hands in. So you wanted to buy, so you would say, I want to buy 100 contracts at 90. And I'd look around the room, and if somebody wasn't saying it, I'd yell it again until finally somebody would do it, or I have to raise my price if I was buying. So you have your hands coming in because you're buying, and then you got to use your fingers to say how many contracts that you're doing. So it's pretty simple. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then if it became bigger than that, it'd be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then if you have 10s on this side, it'd be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And then you got into the hundreds, 100, 200, 300. And then if you got into the thousands, it was like the Indians. You had 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. And that's how you did it. So hands going out, they were selling. Hands coming in, you're buying. And you always say how many you want to buy at what price, or how many you want to sell at what price. And then also on top of that, we had signals for who was doing what. So if the Japanese bank, Shimano, all right, they were a big bank, big player, but everybody knows Shimano fishing rods. So if Shimano was buying something or they were trying to sell something, we would look over at our buddies and give them the fishing line, like a fishing pole. So we had different little code names for all the major banks and all the major players, and everybody had their own nickname, and that's how it used to work back in the 80s and 90s. And to tell you the truth, I think it functioned better for the little guy back then than it does today. Today, you got to have a supercomputer, and it's a whole different program. After those initial glory days, now that you guys know how to do your hand signals, the Chicago got a second exchange that really came into glory in the middle to late 80s, called the Mercantile Exchange. And the Mercantile Exchange was across town of downtown Loop, and we traded a new commodity called the S&P 500. And boy, that took off like a rocket. You were able to do so many different things, and the pit down there was just packed. It cost $500,000, which was a heck of a lot of money back then, to buy a seat on the Mercantile Exchange. It used to cost about $5,000 prior to this. So that value went up dramatically. One day, an old girlfriend from high school came on the floor, and there was a bunch of activity going on, and she asked me to, what was going on. And I told her, well, Japan's selling their bonds right now. We got a big problem with our trade deficit going on right now, and the European Union. She goes, boy, that's fantastic. Do you mind repeating? And I looked at her and I said, oh, did I stutter? And she said, no, I want to tape that for our television news broadcast. And I said, well, let me check in with my boss and see if I can do that. And so I started the noon update before they had CNBC. I had about a 3-minute spot where I said the Dow Jones is doing this, the S&P was doing that, and that's how I got my start in television. And thereon got into a radio show. We used to do radio shows to try to get clients. To be honest with you, we would do the market predictions, and people would call in. We'd solicit, tell them to call in, and then I would spend my nights calling these people back in the day when you had friends and family that you could call, and you didn't have these phony robot calls like that. So we built up our book of business, and we did radio to try to do seminars. And people came to the seminars. We'd have 50, 100 people to these seminars. And radio and TV was instrumental in the growth of mine and other people's businesses. I think today it's a little bit of a different story because we have CNBC and people are a little more leery of it. But in the 80s, it was really a hot tamale.
You liked the way things were going for you because you had an outlet, if you will, for your financial knowledge. And you were able to help the common man, if I can say it that way.
And that really got me excited. I liked helping people put money away, grow their businesses, save money on their taxes. That there was this big gap. And so you were too good for H&R Block, but not quite big enough for Arthur Andersen or some of the KMPG, accounting firms. There was a whole plethora of tools that we had in the toolkit that we could help people make money. So I wanted to try to share some of these knowledges, and hundreds and hundreds of clients that we've helped over the years. It was very, very fun.
In most cases, people really didn't understand that much about managing money, if you will, and
absolutely,
put money aside.
The real catalyst for that was live radio. We were on a station called WJJD, and Clark Weber, who was a big DJ at the time with the 60s type music, preceded me. So when we did the show, it was live, and we would have call-ins. Most entrepreneurs are very good at whatever they do. If they're buying and selling real estate, if they're building widgets, if they're bakers, butchers, candlestick makers, but when it came time to budgeting money, to putting away money for retirement, and then using some of the tools available to them, as far as financial instruments, they didn't really know much. Somebody called up and said, Tom, I want to know, should I take my money as a lump sum, or am I better off to have a stream of payments every month for the next 30 years? And I said, well, that's great. What are we talking about? He says, well, hang on 1 second. And I hear the phone drop, and you could hear the thing rattling, and he runs down the hall.
What were kind of the steps that you went through with somebody? I mean, you get a sense for their profile, obviously, who they were, like you say, a candlestick maker, but how did you actually take that first step with them, and what were the kinds of things that you would recommend? Do you recommend the same things to everybody, or is it different?
Everybody has a different situation, and they think that there's such a mystery behind the stock market. And I always say that you have to pay yourself first. So you have your business, and if you have your own business, you're in such a fortunate situation. And I'll never forget, it was Joe. And I said, well, I guess Joe's going to get his statement. And so Joe comes back to the phone, and I'm trying to fill the airtime because dead airtime. And Joe says, well, in my letter, it says Publishers Clearinghouse will give me $1 million all at once, or I could get a stream of payments. It was always unique because everybody's unique.
Yeah.
There are similarities. I said, well, Joe, if Ed McMahon shows up at your door and you get the Dream Squad with the balloons, give me a call. I'll be right there to help you. The first steps, what I did, and I felt what made me so successful, was I listened. Most people who are in the industry want to talk to you or even at you. And I found that very disingenuous, and that's where you end up with the cookie cutters, and they're recommending what their company is pushing at the time, or what they thought that they were going to get paid the most on, or something to that effect. I was working for a large company, Kemper, that became Everin Securities, that became Wachovia, and a bunch of different, we kept on getting bought out back then. I was giving this advice to people, but I couldn't heed the advice myself because I was a W-2 employee. So I decided that, well, heck, if I just started my own company, I could take advantages of some of these different tax codes that I've been trying to tell these other people for the past years. Okay. So that was kind of my emphasis to get into my own business. And I did some of the math and seeing, well, by the time I give my cut to the business and pay my taxes and everything else, hell, I can almost do half the work and still make twice the money. My experience got better, and our track record got better at trading. Now we started doing all sorts of different types of business, and there was a new thing called financial planning that came into the world. So I found an office space and started bringing in clients and then friends of friends and things like that. And the first thing I would start with, as I said, like we're doing right now, I would have them tell me about themselves and tell me, what makes them tick, what they like. Basically, me and you just having a beer, having a good time, getting to know each other. And yeah. I would do that for about a couple hours. As I got to know you, and generally I felt fortunate because I spent so much time with my clients, I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me.
Sure you were. I wanted to succeed, I'm sure.
Of course. So when I first started out, I took everybody. I mean, anybody coming down the street. Yeah, okay, right. But then I wasn't snooty about it, but I just became people who I would think would take my suggestions. Some people, as the old saying goes, you can lead them to water, but they're not going to drink.
Is that a lot of pressure on you personally, because they're really saying to you, okay, here's my money, Tom, manage it for me, and I hope that when I'm 65 years old and I'm going to retire, that I got a nice little pot of gold there. I mean, is that a lot of pressure on you?
Of course it is. I didn't realize it until my later, as I started getting into my 40s, because we were just Wild West gangsters, But as I got into my, I just thought it was a way to keep score. This much money, this much. But as I dealt with more people and more, families and more tragedies and more things, people dying, people being born, all of that stuff, I realized that money really was not a bearer of value. It was truly about their lifestyle or what their abilities. And I always got this one question, and I always kind of ended it the same way. People would say, well, if I just made another $10,000, we would be happy. And I said, well, okay. And then we'd show them how to make another $10,000. Then the next year they'd come back and say, yeah, you know, we hit that goal, but if I made $20,000 more, we would really be happy. So after hearing that so many times, I said, happiness is not the money.
Right.
It's about choices. You're going to drive your car. Now, whether it's a Mercedes-Benz or a Volkswagen, that's the choice.
Just sense it about you. You take a very personal interest in your clients. It's not just, you know, how much of a fee you can possibly make on having them as a client, but that you really want them to grow, and that's your reputation.
Sure, I'd love to be Tom Brady and have $200 million sitting in the bank somewhere, but at some point in time, as long as you're comfortable and you're happy and you can share that and share some of that knowledge, I feel it's my obligation to share the knowledge with people so that they can actually live a less stressful life. It seems like we have so much stress, and a lot of that circles around financial decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to segue here, Tom, and getting into Ask the Expert, because that's a radio show that you've had for a number of years. And
2012 we started.
2012.
I sold my business up in Chicago. I had a boutique firm that we did really well during the millennial crash, because I didn't trust. I used my dad's mantra. If a company, and we talked about a little of this off camera, if a company isn't making money, but their stock prices are way high, to me that rings a bell of some kind of problem. So I didn't do the .com thing with a lot of clients, and unfortunately, you know, I told the clients if they want to do that, go to Schwab or go to Fidelity and go someplace else, because I wasn't going to do that. Then a lot of the people did so and lost a lot of money when the crash came. Citibank at the time had been offering me for my book of business, is what they call it, all of my clients. And so my dad passed away, and I said, well, you know, why don't we just make the move? Let's go to Florida. I'll take the offer from Citibank. Fortunately, they paid me in stock, which I ended up selling the stock at $50 a share, and several years later, the price of it went down to $3 a share. So I don't claim to be the smartest guy in the world, but sometimes luck.
That was pretty smart.
Luck does come into it a little bit. You have to put yourself in a place of having the luck.
Right.
I mean, that's you have to take advantage of it. And so that's how I look at it. And so when we came down here, did a number of things, and then back in right after the next crash, the crash in '08, the real estate crash, we opened up a new brokerage office and started Ask an Expert.
I love the fact that you are such a humanitarian, if I can use those words, in terms of your willingness and desire to help people financially. And you did that show for how many years?
Well, we started in 2012, and initially it was a way to vet other professionals. So I originally started the show by bringing on accountants, different brokers, different people, so that I could ask questions, ask the expert, and who I deemed to be an expert, and then find out if they truly were. So then people could have the resources that I had up in Chicago. Because I saw a big void down here of professional people, and you know, wonderful people all around, but they all seemed to come from all different areas of the country and the world, and there was not the same work ethic that you found in New York or Chicago or drive. And so to me, I thought we needed to find good professionals to try to help the local people, because there's a lot of entrepreneurial people here too. Most of them, that's what they are.
That's what they are, exactly.
We came on gangbusters. I got a lot of doctors' offices. Doctors love them. Some of my best friends are doctors. I play golf with some doctors every Sunday. But as far as investing, if you have a doctor friend, ask him what he's doing with his money and do the exact opposite, because they're smart, everything else, but they're terrible investors. I haven't met one that isn't really particularly good. So what we started to specialize in is doing pensions and 401ks, and a friend of mine was president of Key Bank, and Key Bank got bought out by UBS, and so he didn't want to be part of an international company. He'd been in the business long enough. So we started a firm dealing with these buy-sell agreements, these cross-collateralization, a little bit more sophisticated stuff than the ma and pa at this stage in our life. But then again, still helping the doctors' families, and we have a lot of great stories of what we did to do it. Once that really took off, the show now could go into a different stage, which I really enjoyed. And that's where I just started getting anybody who was interesting, kind of like what you do, and I bring them on the show for an hour. And it was unscripted, and we would ask questions. I had the head of the Federal Reserve on the show. I had baseball heroes that come down here for spring training. I had hockey stars, politicians, a bunch of politicians, but interesting people who had interesting stories, and I asked them the questions that I thought everybody else would want to know.
How did you make money with it? I mean, was it there for
Sure.
you to get clients, or did you have advertisers?
Well, again, the original idea was the show would allow me access to different professionals in the area that would either become clients or refer clients to me. And so they never paid to be on the show, and we didn't really have a lot of advertising. We had enough advertising to pay for the show and the engineers and all that other type of stuff. But it wasn't
a profitable venture.
It wasn't a profitable venture as the show itself, but as the clients came in, then it became much more profitable than any radio.
So it was a catalyst for you to get clients, basically.
Basically, yes.
Okay.
Once we established a pretty good book of business here, that's when I, started just getting people because I wanted to get people. I didn't have any interest in having them be clients. If they needed help, I was there for them. But it was just whoever I could get that was going to be a new fun show for the week.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic came. We were running on all cylinders now, because we had a website that was getting blown up all the time. We had people who were competing to become advertisers on our show. We had guests that would call up, and we didn't have to go out and search out people anymore. But as everybody knows, when you're doing a face-to-face interview in the radio studio and COVID came, radio studio shut down. They didn't allow any people who were not employees, Sun Broadcasting and Fox, to be in the studio. And so I felt that it lost a lot of its appeal if I had to do it over the telephone or something like that. So we did a couple of reruns, and then we shut it down.
Yeah. So what's the next thing on the I guess, a radar for you?
Well, I'm looking forward, as everybody, to try to find a new normal. And I think that I've had to evolve over time, just I think as everybody should. I mean, if we stuck in the same lane and the same mold forever, life would be kind of boring.
Right.
So we are looking to try to do maybe some more radio, reinvent the show a little bit, maybe do a little bit more of computer podcast type of a situation. We are doing, I see a lot of opportunities as things are starting to change from the old business models to newer avenues to sell and do business. And people are finding that you don't have to waste all this time driving to an office building. And you can have synergies with people besides having to be in one room together. So I'm looking forward to a future that will have those types of ideas.
Looking into the future, is it positive? Is it bleak?
I see a couple of trends. Right now we've trended back to staying at home and people buying homes. So it's created an overheated home market again, but it's very laser oriented. You can't just buy any particular home and expect it to be going up. But the downsizing that was kind of the fad for a while is seeming to kind of reverse itself. Now that might change again in the future. I also see the urban populations becoming less desirable because people don't want to be in that close of proximity and elevators and all the other things. When the stock market is at these types of what they call price to earning ratios, and when you have the earnings of the companies down here but the price of the stock up here, one of two things has to happen. And it's either the price of the stock has got to contract to make it more in line, or the earnings have to robustly grow up. And I think we're going to see a little bit of both. So I'm not calling this the froth or the irrational exuberance, as Alan Greenspan once said, but I would say be extremely cautious. And a lot of times if you stay close to home and do 3 or 4 or 5 different companies that you know about and you feel that are good, buy them, stick with them. Don't try to outbeat the timing guys. Don't try to get in and out of the market. God bless you if you think you do, but I'm going to tell you, my experience in 40 years almost of doing this, most people that try to day trade or swing trade end up losing their money. And if you're an investor, you're investing in America, I think America is going to do well, and I think that we as a country will get through this tough period.
Well, there you go, folks. Right from the expert, Ask the Expert. And Tom, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And you really are a very interesting person. There's no question about it.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you next time, folks. Bye-bye.
Down the Street Live.
Next week on Down the Street Live, we're going to be catching up with Annie Wenz, a Pine Island resident who is a most accomplished artist, composer, songwriter, potter, and defender of injustices, among many other things, who has traveled the world following her heart. You're going to love her.
Down the Street Live, where we meet interesting people throughout America and beyond.